Our friends are dismayed. This is not the United States. They recognize. They're also worried that as we turn inward, which I think is inevitable to deal with all of our challenges, where we may not be there for them. So they're very much worried about increasingly a world without the United States. And as you suggested in what you said, I think there's a real chance that our foes are going to see this as a moment of opportunity. Indeed, some of what China's doing in Hong Kong may already reflect that.
When you say America's friends are dismayed, Richard, are you referring to events of the last couple of weeks or a bigger time period than that?
Both. The last couple of weeks have been particularly powerful, whether how we handled or mishandled the pandemic, the racial issues, what happened in Lafayette Park on Monday night, and it really hurt in Australia, where you had an Australian media crew that was attacked. But all this takes place against a context. When foreigners come to the United States, they land at our airports. Their own airports are much better. They've seen our political dysfunction. They do not understand the prevalence of guns in our society, all the opioid deaths, the inequality. So essentially, they still admire parts of the United States. They still want to come to our universities. They admire our tech companies. But in many ways, this is not the United States they grew up respecting.
At the same time, Richard, whenever there are these big picture questions and when you pose the leadership challenge, the question is who will come in and take that spot. And we looked at China, where it's been dealing with its own issues. They have a lot to explain when it comes to the coronavirus and what they knew when and how they projected that to the world, the Hong Kong protests, and now the global community condemning what they've been doing in Hong Kong.
You're exactly right. And I think the real alternative to a U.S.-led world is not a China-led world for all the reasons you mentioned and others. China's not a model for most countries. China doesn't have allies. It doesn't have partners. I think the real alternative to a world that we've led is a world that nobody leads. And that's dangerous because the world won't come together by itself. And there's no way other countries can on their own either handle a rising China or an aggressive Russia, or they can deal with issues like climate change or terrorism or public health. The world has worked so well now for nearly 3/4 of a century because it was largely built by the United States with others, but also we were there. Our alliances, all these institutions. The world's gotten used to that. I think on balance, it's been overwhelmingly in our interest. This is a business show. The return on investment of American world leadership has been extraordinary, but in many ways, we've decided to abdicate. And I think that's a dangerous moment.
Richard, if you're right about all of these issues in the first place, how quickly can they be reversed or rectified? Is it something that can be done with a simple change in policy, or is this something that will take decades to address?
It's a great question. Some things will take time. You can't turn it on a dime. Other things are attitudinal, how you deal with an ally. What you say, you can rejoin certain international arrangements. But fixing a lot of the ills in American society, from racism to K-12 education, to make ourselves more competitive, to live up to our own principles, that's the stuff of decades. To fix the State Department, just to take another example, to make the Foreign Service strong again, that's probably a generational challenge given what's happened the last few years.
Richard, for investors, it comes down now in a lot of ways to the U.S. and China, which it's gotten confrontational again. Tensions are rising again. The U.S. protests, as we've reported, have been a big topic on Chinese state media and social media. Where does that go? With a presidential election in this country, how likely are we to see further escalation in tensions and potentially a further breakdown in a trade relationship?
I think it could happen either way. One of the few areas where there's a lot of overlap between Democrats and Republicans right now is on a very tough stance towards China. Democrats may worry more about human rights in Hong Kong or elsewhere in China. Some people worry more about what China's doing in the South China Sea or with Taiwan. Then, of course, you have the economic frictions. But I actually think there's a really broad group of Americans who have real concerns about what China's doing, which is another way of saying that even after the election, even if, say, Joe Biden is the 46th president of the country, I don't think you're going to see suddenly a major upswing in U.S.-Chinese relations. There's a lot of structural problems there, and history suggests it's always difficult between a rising power and the existing power. But again, nothing's inevitable here. A Cold War is not only not desirable, it's also not inevitable. This is why God invented diplomats.
All right. Richard Haass, thank you very much.
Thank you.